Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of What's New in Prisma version 3.11.0. My name is Alex, and I'm joined by my colleague Austin Cream. Austin, how are you?
I'm doing well, Alex. It's St. Patrick's Day here, so I've got my subtly green shirt on. So I'm
Interesting.
I'm protected from any pinches or anything like that. But you are not, on the other hand.
I am not even sure I understand what St. Patrick's Day is. What is it?
That's a good question. In my mind, St. Patrick's Day is a great day to wear green. And if you don't wear green, you are often pinched or otherwise ridiculed.
Okay, so is it specific to just wearing or just having anything green on you? Yeah, like I have this.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
You're safe. You're safe.
Cool. That was also totally unplanned, but yeah. Cool. So let's jump into the release notes. We had a heavy or big release on Tuesday, so I'll go ahead and share my screen. So let me bump up the font. Is that big enough?
That looks good.
So the release went out on Tuesday, and it was a pretty big release. And one of the features that we shipped was experimental support for embedded documents. So given that you have enabled the MongoDB preview feature flag, and in this case, we have two models, product and order. And product has a contains many, like a one-to-many relationship with photos that's defined down here, which is an embedded document. And order has two embedded documents, which is the shipping address and the billing address. They're definitely different on the database. You can now filter by, for example, the equals by comparing the value of what you pass in and what is actually contained in the document. Another thing that you can do is with the contains menu, where you have the photos has like the contains menu, so you can search for all documents or all records, I guess, of product that don't have an empty photo. Yeah. Another feature related to this that was shipped was the ordering by embedded documents. So using the schema from above, you can now ship by ascending or descending order of a field in an embedded document. And by the way, I am hoping that this doesn't break on the release notes, because I think at the time we're recording GitHub, I'm not sure if it's still down. I hope I hope it's not, because if I refresh and it breaks, well, that's it for us. Yeah. Another big feature that we shipped is the querying support for MongoDB. So you can enable it when you initialize your Prisma client by setting the log levels and setting the what's it called, the middleware, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And then the logs that you'll get on your console will look something like this, and you can use these logs on the Mongo SH console if you'd like. They're compatible, or it follows the structure that the Mongo SH accepts. So another big feature, which was sort of hard to comprehend, is the introspection update. So with embedded documents, given MongoDB has a no schema format, it's sort of hard to maintain the structure of your embedded documents. So if I have, and what Prisma does when it introspects your database is that it takes a sample of your data and then generates the types or the embedded documents based off of that. So a problem that comes up is that if out of 100 documents you have 90 of them that have 4 fields and the 10 have 6 fields, Prisma would take the 90 documents and generate types based off of that, and then give you a warning that a few columns or documents are missing specific fields. And then what this did was that you ran into an error where you could, whenever you wanted to write a query, or Prisma client would crash, throwing exceptions, and also Prisma Studio would crash. So in 3.11, that was fixed. And instead of applying sort of it's really hard to explain these concepts live. Anyway, So instead of implying an embedded document, Prisma client Prisma schema will have the JSON type, but the Prisma, when you introspect, Prisma will still tell you the fields that you have to fix or the fields that are missing in different documents so that you can fix them. Another feature that we shipped is the update to the Prisma client logger. So this is a big thing because this will open up to bigger features such as tracing that we currently don't have. And I am really looking forward to it because it helps with observability. Then, and since we are also pushing CockroachDB connected to GA, we now support migrations that shipped on Tuesday. If you're a CockroachDB user, feel free to try it and let us know what you think so that we can ship this feature to production sooner. Yes. And finally, we have an exit code that was introduced to migrate diff, such that if something went wrong while you're introspecting or creating a diff, you can definitely exit based off on that code, I believe. And of course, the default, we have a lot of bug fixes and issues closed, and thanks to our engineering team. Yes. And that is all for the release notes. I forgot to share that if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. And I think you have a demo for us, Austin, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, thanks, Alex, for going over the release notes. Let's just take a quick look at what some of these new MongoDB features look like in action. So I'll go ahead and throw my screen up there. So I'm using the similar schema as to what we have in our examples in the release notes. So you'll notice, of course, I'm using the MongoDB provider, and I'm ensuring that I have the preview feature enabled up here in my schema. But yeah, I'm using that same schema, that product in order, those product in order models, which are full-blown models in the Prisma schema that are going to correspond to their own collections in my MongoDB Atlas instance that I have hosted. Each of these has an embedded document as well. So the new type keyword that we introduced in the last release to denote that this is an embedded document. It's not its own collection, but it's a piece of structured data that's going to live within another document inside another collection. So again, our products can have an array of photos. Perhaps those photos have a couple of dimensions as well as a URL. And then again, that order model can have a couple different addresses. And the embedded documents here is a really nice way to reuse that structured data. So like each of these is an address, and we don't have to redefine each of those fields. We can just write it once and use it in both places, which is a really nice feature.
Cool.
So again, this new release is really about making embedded documents work the way that you would expect, since it is different, since they live differently in your MongoDB instance, as opposed to a full-blown model. There's more work that needed to be done to make sure that they work the way that you expect. So here I'm just requesting all of our products, and I'm going to console log them using this JSON stringify trick to make sure that they look nice. And I'll just show what that looks like. I think I just have 3. Yeah, it looks like just 3 products, and each of them have a photo, and they have a name, and they have an associated order as well. So to just show the couple of new features, this first one I'll do a filter.
Mm-hmm.
So here I'm doing that same find menu query, but I'm filtering based on whether the photo is a .jpeg. So maybe you have photos that are either JPEGs or PNGs or a lot of different formats. Here you can actually drill down into the embedded type and look to bring back any of the products that have that JPEG type. So I can run this again, and I think maybe have 2 that are JPEGs.
Tiny request, could you move the editor to the right? It's usually hard to, well, for demos, it's hard when it's at the bottom of the screen sometimes, yeah.
How do you do that? I'm not sure I know
So I,
how.
so I think on the where somewhere terminal is or on the same line, you just right click or yeah, and or the double click or something, and then you can
Like
something
that?
like that. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so I actually don't think I had saved after I uncommented this query, so I'm going to rerun that. Cool. So we have our filter products here. Now we just get the two different products um, that actually have JPEGs attached with them. And we did not get the one that had the PNG up here from our original query. So go ahead and just making these Prisma queries work the way that we expected them to.
Cool.
And then, yeah, again, the order by down here works in a very similar way where you can now pass an order by flag and I can select that shipping address. You remember that was our embedded type. And this is the same example that was in our release notes where maybe we want to order by the zip code ascending. We could also order by maybe the city or the street if you wanted to do that for any reason. But again, we have that classic Prisma autocomplete helping us out. And we could order either ascending or descending. Again, I can run that query and we'll have our ordered products with the one zip code up front and then 2 and then 3. So again, all that is working the way you'd expect it to. This just helps bring the feature parity up a little bit with our MongoDB preview feature.
That's really, really cool. Oh, I was just going to ask whether
Yeah,
we could try the MongoDB querying,
yeah. So
the query
the other nice
logging. Yeah.
thing, yeah, for sure. The MongoDB query logging is also really cool.
Mhm.
I know some Prisma users don't actually know that you can enable query logging on your Prisma client. So if
Mhm.
this was a relational type of DB, you could pass this log option and tell it to log out the generated queries. So whenever you run a Prisma query, it would actually log the SQL that gets generated in your console. Now, obviously, with MongoDB, we don't have SQL generated, but instead we log the Mongo shell, the equivalent Mongo shell commands. So if I
Mhm.
run this again, we should see 3 different queries get logged. It's
Ah,
a little hard to read when it's scrunched up like that, but
yeah. The
um,
db.order.aggregate.
yep, this Prisma query line right here. And I personally am not a huge fan of writing these raw Mongo queries in the shell. I don't think it's that easy to read. Like this one where I was trying to do a contains JPEG, you're passing a $sign regex and a
Mhm.
lot of nesting and different things going on. So it's really helpful that you could just generate it this way. And then if I had Mongo shell running, I could just copy and paste and everything would work as expected.
Interesting. I think for us lazy developers, we don't want to write that, but I'm
Yeah.
sure half the internet, if they're watching this, they'd be like, "No, don't do that. Just write the raw query." You know? Yeah, don't use RMs. Yeah, just write raw SQL. Well, SQL is kind of hard, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Very
cool,
cool. Well,
cool,
that's it for me.
cool. And finally, today's stream was um, going to be rather short. So we have a guest. He is called Michael Hayes, and Michael Hayes is the author of a GraphQL library called Pothos. Pothos. I hope, yeah, he'll tell us whether Pothos or po- Pothos. I'm not sure about the
It'll help us
pronunciation.
out.
Yes, and he loves working with TypeScript, GraphQL, and Prisma, and has been working with Node.js since it was in version 0.6. I'm not sure if I was a developer then, but yeah, I was probably still in primary. And he loves to play the ultimate frisbee. So I'll go ahead and bring him onto the stream.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi, how are
Thanks
you?
for having me. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good too. Cool. So, Michael, welcome to the stream. We have our questions, mostly because we're interested in the plugin, the Prisma plugin for Pothos. So wait, let's first settle the question. Is it Pothos, Pothos,
Pothos is how I
Pothos?
pronounce it.
Pothos.
Cool, cool, cool. Yeah, is it Dino, Dano?
Exactly.
Yeah, cool, cool. So, tell us a little bit about the Pothos library.
So Pothos is a code-first GraphQL schema builder for TypeScript with kind of a focus on type safety and extensibility through a plugin system.
Mhm.
it has, if you're familiar with the GraphQL ecosystem, you've probably seen type GraphQL or GraphQL Nexus. So it's kind of an alternative to those libraries with a slightly different approach.
Oh, cool, cool. And how is it different from whatever's existing in the ecosystem, by the way? Yeah.
Yeah, so there are a number of things. I think the things that are easy to see are kind of the plugin ecosystem. I have kind of a large number of plugins that I've built out, and while some of the other options do have plugins, I think the plugin ecosystem in Pothos is a little bit richer. Another big thing are kind of like the things that Pothos doesn't do, which are like, it doesn't require code generation. It doesn't depend on experimental decorators. It doesn't have any runtime overhead. And it doesn't expect it's less opinionated about how your data is structured. So in some of the other alternatives, there are various assumptions that are made about how you format your data, or requirements about kind of how you need to massage that data to get it to work properly with the schema you want to define.
Cool.
And yeah, so kind of, yeah, one of the big focuses for Pothos is to separate the shape and structure of your data from the shape and structure of your GraphQL API, which kind of becomes more important as you kind of scale up for small toy projects. It's really easy to have your data look exactly like your API, but as your data changes in your backend, you don't want to be constantly breaking your API. So that can be helpful as your project grows.
Yeah. And one tiny thing that I saw, I'm still naive. I mean, I can do some GraphQL, but I'm still sort of naive. I can't build libraries yet. But one thing I appreciate in the Pothos ecosystem is how there's a plugin for composing sort of response types as union types. And this is sort of similar, like if you have when a response is okay, sort of, or rather it returns the data it should. On success, it returns, for example, a post. However, if it fails, you're able to merge other sort of error types as well, and that can be caught on the front end instead of just an if error sort of thing, which is kind of messy. So I really liked that about it.
Yeah, that plugin is pretty cool. I think that was not an original idea that I had, but it's a pretty cool pattern, and I wanted to write a plugin to support it. And yeah, I think having that extra type safety by defining your errors in your schema is very valuable.
Cool. And an extra question, since there's no code generation, I mean, code generation is great, but it's sometimes when you have a server running and you keep changing your GraphQL types, I think the computer sometimes, my computer at least, usually slows down. So how do you ensure type safety without the code generation, by the
way? Leaning very heavily on TypeScript. TypeScript is incredibly powerful, and you can get really far basically just inferring types based on the arguments passed to functions. And so that's most of the way that it works. Basically, as you're defining your schema, it kind of looks at the arguments you're passing into various methods, and from that it can actually infer everything you need to build your backend schema. To be able to use this with the front end, obviously front end libraries have their own requirements, and most of them do require some form of code gen. And the Prisma plugin that I'm going to be talking about in a little bit, it does have a code gen step. Basically, it hooks into the same compile process that is used to generate the Prisma client. So when you generate a new Prisma client, it also spits out some types for the Pothos plugin to use. But that's a one-time thing when your database schema changes, not every time you want to modify your actual schema.
Cool. Thank you. So I believe you have a demo for us.
I do. So yeah, let me pull that up. Oh, actually, I need to share my screen.
Is it dependent on GitHub? Do you have to push or pull anything?
No.
Oh,
I did.
God. Yeah.
I did publish it, but I have it all locally. So
I'll go ahead and share your screen and then change things up over here. Yeah.
Does the font size look okay?
I think you can bump it up just a little bit.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
let's see.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
Looks good.
Well, I think for some reason zooming is a little bit laggy. So interesting. Okay, let me just shrink this down on the side a little bit. Okay, so I've got a pretty simple Prisma schema here with just a user object that's got a little bit of information about a user. There's a profile with a bio, email, Twitter handle, that kind of stuff. There are posts that have an author, and then some comments. I don't think I'm actually using the comments anywhere in this demo, but it's pretty simple. And then I've got a server here that basically just takes a GraphQL schema and starts, and I'm logging out any Prisma queries that happen, just so that we can kind of see throughout the demo what kind of queries are actually being run. That might help a little bit later. And let's see.
I think what's inside the schema? Yeah.
Yeah, so the schema is kind of the main thing. Actually, first, let me show the builder. So this is Pothos. This is kind of how you initialize a schema builder in Pothos. Basically, we've got a couple of plugins that I'm going to use here. There's a Relay plugin and the Prisma plugin, and a couple of just kind of default options. We're passing an instance of our Prisma client here, and these are just kind of recommended defaults for the Relay plugin, which I'll talk about later. So the schema is the interesting thing we probably want to be looking at here. So in Pothos, everything works through this schema builder object, and you use this to define all of your types. And then once you have all of your types defined, you call toSchema on your builder, and that gives you back a GraphQL schema that should be compatible with kind of any framework or server that you want to use. So it'll work with Apollo or Helix or GraphQL Yoga, which is what I'm using in this example here. And I'm also just writing out the schema to a file so that we can kind of see the generated schema if we're curious what that looks like. So to start out with, I just have a very simple hello world kind of demo. We've got the root query type. We're just defining a single string field that takes a name as a string argument, and then has a resolver that takes this name argument and returns and says hello, basically. If we look here, this name is inferred here from this the name argument we define here. It's optional currently, so we have to have a default. And we can see it's nullable. We could make it required if we wanted to. And that would kind of change the type here so that this is no longer nullable because everything is kind of inferred and type safe. And this field definition here is just kind of a convenience helper for just saying this is a field that has a type of string. Let's see. I think most of what I want to show is going to be inside the Prisma plugin, but I wanted to quickly demo what defining types might look like without the Prisma plugin, so we can kind of see what the Prisma plugin is adding and why it's valuable. Because you definitely don't need plugins to be able to write schemas with Prisma and Pothos, but it can be pretty useful. So Pothos has a number of different ways to associate kind of your data with the types you're defining in your GraphQL schema. And this is one of the most simple. Basically, we're just creating a reference to a new user object. It's going to be this is basically the GraphQL user object that we want to create, and we give it the type here, which is the user type that just comes from Prisma, and then giving it a name. And then doing the same thing for post, and then basically we're defining the fields that those objects are going to have below. Just got a first name and a last name. These expose helpers are basically just defining a field and then giving it a resolver that just resolves to this property of the parent object. So these are also completely type safe. So the autocomplete here basically shows you the list of compatible properties. So on a user, you've got like an ID and a first name and a last name. But because the IDs are numbers, they won't show up here as valid things to expose. If we had like an ID here, we would see the ID. IDs can be strings or numbers, which is why these any fields that are strings or numbers would show up here as valid things to kind of expose. If we want to have additional fields that are not derived from properties that already exist on our source data, you can just define a field and then give it a resolver, like full name here. For our post object, we're also I'm adding an author field, basically just to have that relationship from a post to an author. And this basically just uses Prisma to look up the user based on the oh man, these pop-ups are annoying. The author ID of the parent post object, and then we're defining a simple recent posts query field so we already defined our query type. So this is just adding a new field to our query type here. And that just uses Prisma to quickly look up the 5 most recent posts from our database. If you're familiar with GraphQL, like N+1 issues, this probably jumps out at you, where when you fetch the posts, we're going to be making a request here that fetches those 5 posts, and then when we get those back, we'll go in here, we'll resolve the post, and if we select the author, we're going to make another request for each of those user fields. And this is one of the things that's really cool about Prisma, is that despite us calling this db user find unique 5 times, if we're getting 5 posts, Prisma is smart enough most of the time to be able to optimize this into a single SQL query, which is pretty cool. But it's not like, ideally, if we know we're always going to be getting the author, it would probably be better if we were just fetching that ahead of time. So we could in here say like, oh, anytime I get a post, I also want to make sure that we have the author preloaded. So you could do something like this and basically just say this. We always want our author to be part of our post. If you look down here, we'll immediately see like, oh, this is complaining. We are not providing that author. So you can include the author. And then in here, you would be able to just do post author and everything would work. This is great, but if you're not selecting the author, you might be overfetching, and which is not ideal. Now you're fetching data you don't actually need. And this is a pretty common problem where there are obviously optimized optimal queries for resolving different types of GraphQL queries, but figuring out when to use what query is kind of tricky because your queries might all be different. And there are some existing tools like Prisma Select, I think, is one, where basically you can look at your incoming query and dynamically determine what fields you want to be including or selecting. But they tend to be a little brittle, and there are a number of cases where it just doesn't work very well. Like a very simple example is if I wanted to call this like post author or something right now, a tool like Prisma Select wouldn't know that this post author is the author. And then you're kind of closely tying your column names to your API schema, and that's not ideal. So
also feels brittle in the sense that if you remove a bunch of fields, then your entire API is sort of broken. Yeah.
So it gets weird, and there are some issues. So this is why this is kind of the problem I wanted to tackle when I started building the Prisma plugin. So I guess what I'm going to do now is show what it might look like to define this. Define these same types with the Prisma plugin instead of using just kind of the normal way of defining object types. So with the Prisma plugin, there are some new methods on the builder object. So we've got Prisma object here, and we can define a user. This is all auto-completed based off of what's available in your database. And then we can kind of expose, this basically creates a type, and the defining fields mostly works just the same. You can expose data from your model the same way you would otherwise. But there's also new ways of defining fields in this Prisma plugin. So if we have an author, you can use the relation field helper, and this will basically define a field that automatically maps to the correct type, and you don't have to define a resolver for it or anything.
Just curious as well, can we rename author to something else, not in the
absolutely, yeah, we can call this post author, and that works fine. You'll notice that like a lot of the Pothos API, it feels like we're duplicating information by having like title here on the left and on the right side of these kind of field definitions. But this is something that is done very explicitly to make sure that we're not, we don't want, if our data changes, we don't want our schema to change unless we're kind of explicitly changing our schema definitions. And kind of this is a very intentional separation so that things like this will always work.
Okay. And a follow-up question: what's the find unique for?
Yes. So that I'll get to that in a little bit. This is one of the things that is required to make some of the edge cases work. Basically, it's not used for like the overwhelming majority of use cases will never call this method, but it's basically a trick to help in edge cases that might otherwise fail. And then, so the last thing I want to add here is a field. Let's get our recent posts again. This time, there's another new method called Prisma field. And so we are getting a list of posts. So the syntax here is for defining a list field. Basically, you just wrap the type in an array, which is similar syntax as you might see in GraphQL schema. Oops. Oh, I don't think I have DB imported here. Cool. Actually, I'm just going to skip that for now. So I'll just call this posts because they're not recent now. So we're taking 5 posts here. This Prisma field has a new thing. So this is similar to what you might have seen if you've used Prisma select, but basically it adds an additional fifth argument at the beginning of your argument list for your resolvers, and that argument is basically, I don't know why it says any right now. Oh, it's not. Okay, I was just being slow. It basically just gives you a query you can spread into your Prisma query, and this is going to be an optimized query that selects all of the things that you might need to resolve this request. So,
for example, if in my GraphQL API I request for first name and last name, that's exactly what Prisma will return, right?
So I'll show you here in a second. So here we're grabbing posts, we're grabbing and we're just going to grab the first name of the author of those posts. If we look here, we're logging what we're actually querying. So in this example, we are querying for find many on posts, and we're including the author. If I just grab the title here instead, we are not, basically we're just, there's no include here. It's just taking the first 5. So by default, it doesn't select down to the field level. That is something that is supported. But as you mentioned before, you get into weird edge cases, and we want to make sure that that's completely type safe, and there's nothing that is depending on the unselected fields being present. And if there's enough time, I'll kind of show how you can basically switch an object into selection mode, so it'll select just the required fields. But the default behavior is to select the whole object, because that is generally more safe. And for most databases, I think selecting specific columns doesn't provide like a significant performance benefit if you have a relatively small number of columns without large chunks of data.
Okay, interesting.
So let's see. The next thing I wanted to show is we've got, you might want to define a list of posts here. So we can do t.relation again and have our post field. So this works great. But there is a problem, which is that frequently when you're selecting a relation, you don't just want to grab everything that's there. You might want to order it, or you might want to filter it in some way. And so to be able to do that, you can pass a query. So I'm just going to do order by created at. And you'll notice all of this is
completely type safe.
Completely type safe, and gives you autocompletes as you're kind of going through it, which is pretty cool. So now our posts will be ordered by descending order. Another thing that is common is you might want to have arguments on your fields to be able to kind of customize what posts are returned or how they're sorted. So I'm going to define an argument here. Let's call it oldest, and we want to see our old posts. Just make this a Boolean. And so now we need a way to basically read this argument and change our query. So we can turn this this query into a function. And say, let's see, args.oldest, something like that. It's pretty basic example, but now we've got an oldest argument on our posts field. And actually, let me also, for convenience here, add a viewer, just so we can directly select a user.
Okay.
Grab a user, and then
so if you also have some time, we have a question in the chat from
absolutely.
Joe. Yeah. So Joe is asking, does the new builder functionality open up the possibility of building our own support for geo-coordinate queries? Yeah.
Sorry, can you say that one more time? Oops.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't quite understand what.
A geo-coordinate. I'm not sure. Could you, if you're still watching us, Joe, please clarify on that. But I think it may be the types. I'm not the type for coordinates.
I'm not familiar with that, I think. Sorry, I don't have a good answer there.
Okay.
Geo-coordinate queries.
Yeah,
I think I'm not. I think I'm missing some context. I'm not sure if that is a Prisma specific feature that they're asking about, or if it's something else. Anyway, sorry. So basically what I did here is I just added a viewer query so that we can select let's just reload this, the viewer, and we can get their posts. We'll just, do I have an ID? I don't think I've exposed the ID. Let me add that as well on our user. So, oh, did I typo something? I must have typoed something somewhere. Oh,
Yeah.
cannot. Did I put that on the wrong type? That's why. Okay, so we've got our posts. You can see they're currently sorted in descending order, and now we can, if we add our oldest argument, we've got, it reverses the order. And so this is where I'm kind of going to go back and explain that find unique, because if you're familiar with GraphQL, you can do some things that are make this pattern a little bit annoying. So if someone might go, I want to get my old posts and I want to get my new posts. So this is something that Prisma doesn't support out of the box. You can't select a relation multiple times with different arguments. And this is kind of why you need to have a find unique on your on your Prisma models. So basically what this will do is if we run this execute this query, I just cleared the console, and what you see here is there are two separate queries we're making, two separate calls to Prisma, basically. So what's going to happen when we run this is we try to resolve this posts field for, let's see, we're getting the old posts first, or are listed first in our query. So what's going to do is when you select, I guess we're going through the user or the viewer field here. So when this resolver executes, this we're going to kind of scan through the incoming GraphQL query and try to build up a query that includes as much of the query as possible. And so what that's going to include is this first post relation, but it won't include the second post relation. So then as we're resolving those, the user object, and we resolve the first posts field, this will automatically be like, okay, this was included in the parent query, and just let you return that data immediately. But then when it goes to try to resolve the second posts field here, it'll detect that it wasn't possible to include that in the original query for whatever reason. And then it will basically say, okay, we need to issue an additional query. And so it'll create a call find unique on the user model, on the current user, and then include this post relation again, along with any other relations that might have not been able to be included in the initial query. So these will still be batched and optimized as much as possible. But basically it'll look through this second thing here, and like, for example, we might also include this one, we might include the author. So if we do that, what you'll see here is the first query here, we're including the posts order in ascending order, and then in the second one, we're including them in descending order, and then inside of that also including the author. And so that's kind of what this find unique is basically acts as an escape hatch when, whoops, that's the wrong, when we are unable to automatically resolve a query.
Okay, interesting. So we are up for time, but Joe clarified his question. So we can go ahead and stop sharing the screen so that we can remove it. Don't get the infinite loop. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, that should be the one. So right. Joe asks, so currently Mongo and Postgres support geospatial queries, but Prisma does not. I'm wondering if this would open up the possibility to build it ourselves so that we can use these DB features via Prisma.
Unfortunately not. The Prisma plugin for Pothos is very much a wrapper around calling Prisma methods. So for the most part, you're just writing Prisma queries, and it's just giving you queries that you can kind of spread into your own Prisma options. But where it doesn't bypass the Prisma client in any way that allows you to add extra features that wouldn't be possible through Prisma otherwise.
Okay, cool. I don't have any further questions unless you have any questions or comments, Austin.
Yeah. First of all, thanks, Michael. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Pothos looks like a great tool. I think it's interesting. Like we get a lot of questions about integrating Prisma with GraphQL, and there's often people often ask why they don't want to duplicate their GraphQL schema and their Prisma schema. They don't like having to manage two schemas. But I think you illustrated a great point where you do want those things decoupled for a number of reasons. You don't want your GraphQL API to be a one-to-one mapping of your database schema. And I appreciated how you mentioned that, because that's something we've had to chat about quite a bit internally. I was curious, the decision to go the code first schema versus the GraphQL schema format. Could you talk a little bit about that decision and some of the functionality that it enables?
Yeah, so I originally built this while I was working at Airbnb, and we were in the process of building up this big internal GraphQL API, where we were kind of consuming data from dozens and dozens of different services and kind of trying to stitch that together into a single API. And we had initially went with an SDL first approach. And what we were finding is that we were just defining the same things over and over again. So we would define our SDL schema, and then we would go and define our resolvers that kind of had a lot of the same data. And you could generate some types, but you still had to kind of redefine all those resolver functions and create files and do that. And then we had pretty complicated authentication logic. And so for every field we were defining our schema, we'd define a resolver, and then we'd also have to define an authentication module, basically, where we were kind of defining all the authentication rules for that type or that field. And then we had a third thing that was related to PII mitigation stuff, where again we basically had the same thing we're defining again and again. And so the idea behind the schema builder approach is that through plugins, you basically have one definition of your schema and of your fields, and then you use plugins to add additional fields that you can are option object properties on those definitions. So you can define your authentication inline, and you can define all of these different helpers inside your schema as part of the kind of same API, and kind of consolidate everything into one system that takes advantage of the same types. And I think the power there is for really big applications, you're going to have a lot of custom use cases, and having a plugin system that kind of enables you to have that whatever custom configuration or logic you need alongside every field definition built in was pretty powerful for us.
Yeah, I definitely think the code first approach combined with the plugin ecosystem that provides a lot of cool flexibility. So yeah, again, thanks. I really appreciate you showing it off.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem.
One final question, before we you go, is from Guido, and is this some sort of Nexus competitor? Yeah.
Yes, I think that is exactly what this is. It's an alternative to Nexus. I think Nexus is a really awesome library, and when I first started building this, I think Nexus had just come out, and I was definitely inspired by it, but we were unable to use Nexus for a number of reasons, and so this kind of built this up in parallel. And I think they're both great tools, Nexus competitor is probably the easiest way to describe it to someone familiar with the GraphQL ecosystem.
Cool. Thank you again, Michael, for joining us. We had a lot of fun, and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you so much. You too.
Hey, Michael.
Ciao.
Bye.
So that was interesting. That was a lot to take in as well. I will update the slide. Yeah. So yeah, I am definitely looking into Pothos after this. Maybe we deserve a Prisma example using Pothos, of course, so for our audience. Yeah, and I think this will also answer a lot of questions that we get from the community on whether you should use Nexus or the update Nexus. Yeah, try Pothos. Yeah,
Yeah, very cool.
yeah. And now we're in the final segment before a few plugs before we answer the questions in the chat related to Prisma. I'll go ahead and share my screen again. Yeah. So one, we're hiring. If you're interested in joining Austin and I and about 50 other colleagues of ours, feel free. We'd be happy to have you. We are a fully remote company. And yeah, if you find a role that's interesting to you, whether it's in marketing, dev advocacy, engineering, sales, apply for it. And all the best. I hope to see you on our team. Yeah. And another plug is CityJS in London. That's happening next week on from the 23rd to the 25th. So we'll be attending, and two of my colleagues, I believe, will be there. So, and if you're joining CityJS, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be there, and we'll be happy to meet you. And finally, Confront JS, that's in Poland next week from the Friday and Saturday. We'll be there. Come join us. Let's chat. It will be a lot of fun. Yeah. And that is it.
Alex, are you going to either of those meetups?
Yes. Yes. I am going to Confront JS. It's sort of my first time getting out of Germany. So, yeah.
Very cool. Best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you. And now for the questions in the chat. So the first one is from Arunesh. Yes. Do we have any plans for providing support for sharding? Do you have any response to that, Austin?
I think we have an outstanding issue or a feature request for that on our repo already. I think for any of the latest updates, we could. I definitely encourage you to go check out our issues tab and see where that's at. I'm not sure if that's on the roadmap yet or not, but if it's something that you're interested in, feel free and go add a +1 to that issue and help us prioritize.
Definitely. I'm not sure that this is a question or a comment from Guido. So building a new platform with MongoDB, Prisma, GraphQL, Nexus, and Next, and he's trying to make it end-to-end type safe with GenQL. Do you have any tips or examples for nesting documents with Nexus and Prisma?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've never used Nexus, so I'm not familiar with that stack. But I am curious with the new embedded document support that we came out, how that plays with some of the existing GraphQL integrations. I haven't checked that out personally.
Yeah, I haven't tried it out either. I'll give it a try. If you have a reproduction, we'll see what we can do as well to help, push this on engineering for them to pick it up to improve whatever's in the ecosystem. Yeah. And the next one is Prisma MongoDB production ready?
Not quite. I think MongoDB is still a preview feature technically. There's been a strong push to get it to general availability as soon as possible. I think we all agree that's our top priority right now as far as the engineering side. So that's why you've seen a lot of MongoDB related releases recently. So not quite, but coming soon. It's definitely our focus right now.
Yes, it is. And does Prisma support dynamically creating tables on the fly?
Interesting. Yeah. I don't think I would say that we support that natively. You could probably run some raw SQL queries at runtime to generate your tables that way if you wanted to. I'd be interested to hear more about your use case. So feel free to come tell us more on our GitHub discussions.
Yeah, I haven't seen such a use case yet. In MongoDB, it would make sense because you don't have a schema, so why not?
Yeah, anything goes.
Yes, and Sudit mentions that he applied for the Prisma ambassador. Sudit, we'll get to your application. We'll definitely receive a response in the near future. And any future support to Snowflake. Do you have any idea what Snowflake
I'm
is?
not sure what Snowflake is. It sounds
Um,
cool.
I don't know about it either, but I've seen it. Something to do with data platforms, I think. I'm not sure if it's a database provider, but if this is something you're interested in, feel free to create a GitHub issue, +1, tell your friends, and then of course for them to +1 for engineering team to upvote it and
Yep.
make it up. Yeah, and that is just about it. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one. Ciao.
See ya.